I'm wearing my shirt for just the occasion. We're going to talk about Mike. We're going to talk with Mike Edison, the man who wrote this book, Sympathy for the Drummer, Why Charlie Watts Matters, and he matters a lot. Yeah, so let's see. Talked about the book already, so we get that covered. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And somebody's making a comment. Los in the house. Okay, Los, good to see you, brother. Thanks for tuning in. I also want to say thanks for tuning in last week when I had Robin Flans on the show with Gary Grimm and Rob Wallace and Joe Bergamini from Hudson Music. And Gary, of course, was Jeff's drum tech for a while. And our special guests that joined us, Steve Gadd, Rick Marotta, and Vinny Colaiuta. So thanks for tuning into that. That was a great chat. Robin is a longtime friend, and I just can't say enough about that book. It's about time, Jeff Porcaro, the man, and his music. So definitely get that book. But without further ado, I'm going to bring on Mike Edison, the author of this book that we're going to talk about, Sympathy for the Drummer. So hang on for Mike. He's quite a fun guy. All right. Okay, Mike. Here we are, buddy.
All right.
Everybody, Mike Edison. Say hello to Mike Edison.
What's up, guys?
The world is watching. Look at this.
Whoa.
All right. So Mike and I'll just say Mike and I spoke on the phone the other day for the first time on the phone, which was kind of funny. We thought it would be a good idea to actually, have a conversation before we did this.
Old school on the phone.
That's right. It was cool, man. It was great. We got to really shoot the shit about a lot of cool stuff. So
yeah, man. Like I say, the best thing about writing a book is making new friends, cats like you, and making a good trip.
Thank you. Likewise, too. I just want to say, Mike, I loved your book so much. I bought 2 copies.
Woo-hoo!
So I could read it a second time.
All right.
All right. I was hoping that joke.
I wish everybody would.
Yeah, everybody, buy it twice. Buy 2 copies so you can read it twice. Is what I said.
Too early to plug it. I'll totally sign copies for Christmas. If anybody wants a signed copy, just private message me and we'll get you sorted out.
Oh, that's cool. Well, we got a lot of folks on already saying hello, and hello, Michael Leisure, my fellow lefty. One of my bandmates is on here, Neil Porter. Hi, Neil. He's the singer and guitar player in the band. Grand Theft Audio, that is my band. A little plug to my band. But I made a couple of notes, Mike, which I've been doing lately because I don't want to leave any stone unturned while we have this conversation today. So
don't worry. We're going unfiltered.
We are going unfiltered.
You may come to regret this yet, John.
No, we were unfiltered. We were unfiltered the other day too, which is pretty funny. No, man, this is great. I'm so glad we're able to do this. And just talking about the book, because that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. When did you decide to write this book? Like how long ago? How far back?
I always tell people, they say, how long did it take you to write? And I say 45 years. I mean, in the middle, I wrote another 5 books and made a bunch of records and stuff. But I think probably right when I started playing the drums when I was a teenager, I started playing along with the Stones and a lot of other people too. I was lucky I got into Chuck Berry and some things really early on. But along with Jimi Hendrix and Black Sabbath and later the Ramones and all these things you play with. But the Charlie Watts was a code that could not be cracked. I mean, Led Zeppelin was something you could learn to play that. You could learn to play those songs. But the Charlie thing was just like opening up hi-hats on off beats and then the and to 3 and it just had this groove to it, and he meant so much to the band and to my personal philosophy about how to approach rock and roll. I've been cogitating on it for a very long time. I've got notes on like everything, like on cocktail napkins and stuff collected over the years, just That's about cool. Charlie, and listen to over and over again to these things that just don't really make conventional sense. The things like you can't be taught these things. You have to just live it, learn it, breathe it. There's poetry and jazz in it. That's why I say if you go on YouTube and you say how to play like Charlie Watts, you don't find very much. You will find literally 10,000 examples of somebody playing Tom Sawyer flawlessly in their bedroom, or the John Bonham catalog. There's tons of that.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's nothing, no Charlie Watts because it's too hard. It's too deceptive.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. I think, and you know, as you well know, he would consider all the things you're talking about mistakes. Like he's, and that's not just forced humility. You know, he really thinks that, like, it's just all a sort of happy accident for him. The stuff that we think is so great, he'll go, I don't know, I just, you know, I did that. I didn't mean to do that, and it just happened that way. You know.
Yeah, but that's part of the beauty is the happy
Yeah.
accident, the beauty of mistakes, and some of them are mistakes. I mean, sure, and some of it's just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
When you
Yeah.
sat down and you're listening to this, wrong by a conventional sort of sense of even meter, and we listened to the beginning of Hang Fire, just that like 2 bars of music, right?
Yeah.
Like, bah, 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 bah. Like so many times, Kenny Aronoff, who did the little musical transcriptions in the book as a favor for me, and he was just like, man, no one would ever let me play the drums like this. It speeds up like within the first 4 16 notes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
But it makes it, but everybody falls together. Boom.
Right.
It does.
Right.
It's just the best. And
Yeah.
that's it. And with Charlie too, the thing is, it's so recognizable. And that's very few drummers have been able to accomplish that. It's partly it's the way he was recorded, especially on the later records, but it's really just the style.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's Charlie Watts. That means
Mm-hmm.
the Stones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Absolutely.
hard to do. Very few drummers have achieved that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to just say too, you made the great example of that. But I mean, in terms of mistakes, when I started playing drums, very similar to you, we have very similar backgrounds. Like I was self-taught and I just listened to their records. And I used to listen to Get Your Yeah Yeahs Out, the live version of Little Queenie, where Charlie starts off on the 1 and the 3. He starts off,
I know.
the beats turned around, and I learned to play the song that way. I air drummed along to it. And when I finally got a set of drums and learned to sit down behind the drums and play it, I played that song, that first couple of measures, I guess, where he plays it until he finally, Keith or somebody turns it around to where he's playing the 2
Charlie
and 4.
does. He doubles up on the bass drum. He plays. He's got it flopped where he's playing the bass drum on the 2 and the 4, and he just sort of plays it twice, throw out the 2, 3, and turns it around. But it's crazy. That's not the only show they recorded for that record. They're
right.
But that's the one they decided to use.
I know. I learned that later. As a kid, I had no idea they had multiple versions of that show. Of recordings of that from different shows, and they chose that one. That's the one that, yeah.
And of course, not too tangentially, the beginning of Start Me Up, which is like the most famous like cock up, in history, and it's fantastic. Yeah. I've read like page-long explanations, like college level, shit about like what happens in the first few bars of Start Me Up, and it's very cool. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, it's and he, and it's in typical Charlie fashion. He never played it the same way again either. He pretty much, he'll do those things and then never ever be either try or even want to, replicate it.
In the moment of going down the rabbit hole with, the beginning of Start Me Up and like looking at various live performances, it became such a big hit, became like, a big, corporate rock hit of the time. So a lot of times it was synced with pyro. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So you better get it right because
right.
You probably get a dirty look from Mick, if the flash pots go off and you're off the beat or something. So
right.
It sort of changes everything. But it is different every time for sure.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, yeah. When he came and visited Zildjian when I was working at Zildjian in 2006. This guy he still works there, Paul Francis. He's the guy that designs the cymbals there. Old friend of mine. And we took Charlie on a tour of the factory. He wanted to come and see the factory. It's a funny story too. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but it was literally the night before they were playing at Gillette Stadium. Mm-hmm. And I'd invited Charlie for going on 20 years at that point to come. And every year I'd invite him when they came through town, and it was for one reason or another. Sometimes their shows are on a weekend. Sometimes his wife was with him and he had no interest in doing that. So anyway, it's literally I was with him in his dressing room until the point where they were taking him on stage. Like they kept saying, Charlie, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, time to go. So we're walking out and he turns to me and he says, I think I want to visit Zildjian tomorrow. Can you make that happen? And I said, absolutely, I'll make it happen. He said, okay, I'll ring you in the morning or ring me, whatever. How's 12 o'clock? I said, that's great. And I still doubted honestly, like as I'm driving home that night after the show and I get up in the morning, I'm like, something's going to happen. He's not going to be able to do it, but he did come anyway. That's a long story longer, but he did come. And Paul Francis, who took him on the tour, basically took him around to show him the factory. He asked Charlie about the intro to Start Me Up because I guess his band was playing it at the time, and I'm thinking, oh no, what are you doing? Don't ask him that question. And he just went, I don't know. Like he said something like Paul's question was something like, can I ask you a question? And I'm thinking, oh no, don't do this. And he said, when the beginning of Start Me Up, will you do that? And you could tell Charlie's heard that question probably about 50,000 times, and he just kind of went, I don't know. I don't. It was a mistake. I think he said that. He said, I think it was.
Oh, it was definitely a mistake. It was just, it got started wrong. You got started off the wrong beat. And I mean, it happens. I mean, the worst is when you're on stage and it happens because you couldn't hear it or something. And then it's really hard to turn it around. I mean, if you got the beat backwards, it's without actually stopping the song and, counting it in again. It could be tricky if everybody's not paying attention. There's this fantastic bootleg. It's the night the New Barbarians played, and Keith had to play the benefit concert in Toronto. Does his slap on the wrist for his heroin bust, and they played that. And so the New Barbarians played his band with Ronnie, and then the Stones played afterwards, and they played a set. And the bootleg's called Blind Date, and so you could find it. It's on the internet, and they do a version of Star Star. Okay, that's the polite title because I promised you we're keeping this PG-13 today, and it's a disaster. And I there's a footnote in my book. It's about this big about it because it's just, I was obsessed with it because they come in backwards. Mick's supposed to come in on the one, like where it goes, there's a little Chuck Berry riff and everybody falls on the one and the song starts off with one, and somehow they miss it. And the whole thing, someone changes the chords like in the wrong place. And so one guy's moved up to the fourth and the other guy's still on the one, and Chuck doesn't know, Keith doesn't know what to do. And Charlie's just sort of vamping, and this just keeps going on and on. And then Keith starts to try to come in, but it's in the wrong key because Bill's already, moved on. And it just keeps, it's the worst. Like if a bar band played like this, you would walk out on it. But yet somehow after about 16 bars of this, it's a mess. And really, everybody should look this up. Star, one day. They finally turn it around, and when it comes together, it's like the skies open, and all of a sudden, the world's greatest rock and roll band again. But man, I mean, it sounded like the worst amateur bar band for about 5 minutes there. It sounded like a bunch of high school kids who just couldn't find the one. And then, boom, Thunderbolts from Mount Olympus, the best thing of all time.
I'm going to look for that. I've seen that. I've got so many boots, and I'll find that one. And I was just going to say, you probably have this particular one as well. There's a live in Perth, Australia, from '73 when Mick Taylor was still in the band, and they do a version of "GimMe Shelter" that is exactly the same thing. It starts off. Charlie obviously can't hear Keith.
Right, that's the thing. Somebody can't hear somebody.
Somebody can't hear somebody, so he's not hearing him through his Gigando monitor, and Charlie's playing it on the 1 and the 3 for the whole first verse, maybe even through the chorus and part of the second verse. He's playing on the 1 and the 3, and you can hear Keith trying to sort of turn it around, but it's just not because they can't hear each other.
It's really hard to do. You got to find that little crack, but it's great. They don't stop the song, and which okay, let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I tell all my students, what comes after 4? 1.
Right.
And that's it.
That's it. Yeah. So you started off as a drummer, and and Charlie was an influence, obviously, a big influence.
I mean, I love the Rolling Stones. I mean, I'm just old enough that Brown Sugar was still on the radio a little bit. I mean, it wasn't at the time when it came out, but it was still lingering. On the radio, it just didn't go away. This is AM radio I'm talking about. WABC in New York, Brucey, and in WABC Top 40 AM radio before we all switched over to the FM rock stations, which in New York were WPLJ and WNEW FM. But it was definitely there in the air. I mean, the Stones were just like, the thing. And I love the Rolling Stones, and I love rock and roll. I don't know. What is it that spoke to me about them? I mean, first, you got Mick Jagger, who's larger than life. It's all very, very sexy. And it's all about sex. I mean, let's be honest. It's playing the drums is about sex. Being in a rock and roll band is about sex.
Sure. Yeah.
Sex. That's what it's all about. And, it really, really speaks to you, I mean, I remember, and I wrote about this in another book I wrote, You Are a Complete Disappointment. It's kind of a childhood memoir. But I remember getting the copy of Sticky Fingers at a garage sale with the zipper on the cover.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And keeping it PG-13 for you, John. But I said, this means someone somewhere is having a good time. This spoke of a world that, way beyond my own, 13-year-old periphery. But it was hot,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I know, man. Yeah, that they had some pretty controversial album covers. I mean, that
Controversial
definitely.
album covers. Have you actually listened to the words to Brown Sugar? Oh
Oh,
my
yeah.
God. It's
Yeah.
sex and drugs and slavery. No way does this get by the radar these days. I mean, it's the kitchen sink
Right.
of fleas, that song. I mean, it's just, everything, so naturally it went to number one.
Right. And I mean, and all seriousness too. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's the lyrics are like, you'd be. I mean, they still play it on the radio, but you'd be hard pressed nowadays to write a song like that, so to speak. But
Having sex with slave girls? Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
much to Jagger's credit, he slurs half of it, which is great too. One great thing about Mick Jagger too, is that he understands that vocals are a rhythm instrument. He knows how to sing and really punch the rhythm out. And I think he's so lucky to have a drummer like Charlie, who also gets that to really sell, the singer. I mean, Charlie knows that his responsibility is to the song and to put the singer over, because Mick's obviously a great frontman and he's a very, very, very good singer, of course. But without Charlie, it's really hard to put over, a message like that.
yeah,
It becomes rock and not rock and roll. And that's why I always say, I mean, children can rock, kids with skateboards rock, Metallica rocks. Sorry, I got to be careful because you're like an industry guy. And I don't know who you're friends with, but the Rolling Stones roll. It's not the Rocking Stones, it's the Rolling Stones.
yeah.
Frank Sinatra rolls, Billie Holiday rolls, adults roll. That's the sex. That's the sexy part of the equation. And that's Charlie Watts. It doesn't work without that.
Absolutely. And talk about like the perfect drum part for that song too. You can't imagine any other, like, knowing that song as we know it. You can't imagine playing it any other way than riding the floor tom during the verses and all those cool things that he does in that song that, like, I think that make that song what it is.
It's amazing. And I say in the book as well, there's like not one Stone song that ends at the same tempo in which it begins. This is like a myth that Charlie is like some sort of metronome, and I say, again, keeping it PG-13, you wouldn't want to make love to someone, who did it like a metronome. Why would you want a drummer who played like one? You gotta speed up a little bit every once in a while. Sometimes you even slow down, but you gotta swing it. You don't. It's just not by the numbers. And listen to Brown Sugar. It ends there. He pushes it through the choruses, and there's a part or two when the maracas emerge. And I'm very big on the maracas, as you know. Flash and GimMe Shelter and Street Fighter Man, and obviously I'm a big Bo Diddley fan, and this whole sound was built on the maracas. But when it just comes in, I think it's like after the saxophone solo. I think, but it just sort of, the whole thing just sort of takes off.
It's that bridge from after the sax solo into the third verse. Yeah.
It's like pouring gas on the fire. It's fantastic.
Maracas are amazing, and for that exact reason, like you say, the way they can add this sense of energy, just even without the tempo necessarily speeding up that many clicks, but it's just that there's all of a sudden a sense of like power and energy there.
That's why I talk about in Sympathy for the Drummer too. Don't be disrespecting the maracas player or the tambourine player.
No way, man.
We used to always have a test when I was in high school. This is one thing I got from, I was kind of an outlier in that I liked a lot of soul music and a lot of things that weren't really popular amongst my peers, my 15-year-old buddies at the time. But I listened to a lot of Motown and soul music, and I used to tell people who wanted to play in the band, here's a tambourine, let's see how you do with this, before you even touch your bass. And if you couldn't play the tambourine, I kind of didn't want you in my basement. I mean, that's the thing. It's the rhythm, it's the feeling. I mean, it's able to swing it and to swing between the notes,
to play it right. Absolutely.
And maracas are really hard to play accurately for the length of time, as is the tambourine.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, my friend Penny Lane says rated R is okay here. She's letting you know that.
Penny, it's a slippery slope.
You let one F-bomb fly and then the floodgates open.
Well, I've been known to work blue, so.
Yes, you have. But another great example of, like you say too, I've always kind of, I do think Charlie has overall, I think he has really good time in terms of, yeah, I know what you're saying in terms of, the push and pull aspect of it. And he talks about that a lot, but Honky Tonk Woman, I think, is a great example of a song that starts, over here somewhere. And, it's by the time they finish, it's like a horse race to
All
the
these songs
finish
can be
line.
Shelter. I
Yeah.
mean, you just,
Yeah.
just check it. And, this is what great guys do. John Bonham does it. Keith Moon, is just another story. It's just sort of like, he starts in fifth gear and,
Yeah.
and off to the races. But someone pointed out to me, Kashmir actually slows down in the middle. He pulls it back and significantly slows it down during the chorus or the verses before it gets back to the chorus. That's really hard to do, without making it sound like it's dragging. It's got to be very subtle. It's very cool.
Yeah, Bonzo was the master at that, playing behind the beat kind of thing, to where he could just rein it all back. And yeah,
I'm always surprised, Charlie and the guys, they always say they're not really big Led Zeppelin fans. They're very careful to say they get on great with them as, as blokes, and, and they're good guys, and they're obviously friends with Jimmy Page. And they always say it's like, just like, like a truck, just barreling down the highway. And I don't really see Led Zeppelin that way. Because to me, even when they're really, really, really rocking, they don't sound like they're in a hurry. They, it sounds very measured, very in the groove. Bonham's got that thing. It's weird. Like Charlie plays, he's got the great relationship where he's kind of chasing Keith. He's sort of taught that the bass player and the drummer play together, and they play in the pocket. And obviously in the Who, that's not the case. And the Rolling Stones is sort of Keith and Charlie have a thing.
right.
And Bill Wyman, who I think is one of the most underrated musicians, ever to be in this game. But the weird thing about Zeppelin is I think John Bonham is playing with the riffs, and he has this relationship with Jimmy Page, but he does keep it in the pocket with John Paul Jones, and he gets to live in both worlds.
Yeah.
In this weird sort of way that makes it work. It's everybody's got their own formula. You got to have a thing, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good analogy too, because I think Bonzo was just such a disciplined drummer. You know what I mean? He was just, for a guy that was not necessarily a trained school drummer, but he had so much discipline in his playing. And
but he had chops to, the Gene Krupaisms, the Louis Bellson stuff. even the Buddy Rich stuff, to
Max Roach too,
point. A lot of Max, and, I talk about drum solos for a moment in my book, because I don't think there are any good ones. Well, there are 3 good drum solos in the history of the sport, and I'm going to give you Wipeout in Safaris, right? Because it's the only one everyone can play on a lunch counter, okay? And I love Joe Morello in Timeout. And one of the great things about the drum solo in Timeout is that the piano keeps vamping. It's not just open space and drums. It's not like the other guys go off to have a smoke. And I say, when people play guitar solo, it's not like people leave the stage either. And I think I'd like to hear more of that. This track, Soulful Drums, this one by Brother Jack, the organ player, Brother Jack McDuff.
I don't know it, no.
Same thing. It's like very opening up, but they're marking time on the Hammond and stuff. And then the other would be Moby Dick, which everyone loves. And it's taken right from, a good part of it's taken right from Max Roach. You can hear all the influences. And, that's a big, obviously, company drum solo, and kind of the height of the art of stadium, drum soloism. But a lot of drum solos are just, gimmicks. And, in that era, you could just set something on fire and people would be very excited.
That's right.
But I've seen it. You have to.
It was the era of the drum solo. Yeah, it was. It was like that, and they were long, and I used to love drums. I still do, but I can appreciate them. But
I'm a connoisseur of the art form, and I'm not beyond coming home, a little bit tipsy and going on YouTube and watching Buddy Rich or whatever. But once you've seen one Buddy Rich drum solo, where are you going to go from there?
Yeah, I know.
And it's fantastic. It is fantastic, but at some point it's a parlor trick. At some point it's not even very musical. I love musical drum solos. I like Louis Bellson. I like watching that. I love watching Chick Webb. I love Joe Jones, both of them, Philly Joe and Joe Jones. A lot of stuff. Gene Krupa I could watch all day. But a drummer's only, they say a band is only as good as its drummer, but I think that sword cuts both ways. A drummer without context you know,
Sure. Yeah.
it's tough. No one ever said to me, none of my girlfriends ever said, hey, come on over, bring over your drums and play a song for me. You know, I never set up my drums out someone's window to try to pitch woo and serenade somebody. You know, out of context, it's a tough thing.
It is. No, absolutely it is. It is. Oh, that's too funny. So talking about, since we're talking about the Stones, and by the way, I loved your video earlier today. I had to take my guy out too.
So funny. I got to thank my buddy D Pop, drummer extraordinaire and a great man, great friend of mine. D Pop, New York legend who's played with the Gun Club. He's in the Bush Tetras, very famous no wave band from New York who are fantastic, and kind of an open secret. He played on some pretty well-known Clash songs, uncredited, and portions. And he plays in my band, the Edison Rocket Train, all the time, and a great guy. But he worked up at Steve Maxwell's and had a nice time with Charlie Watts. You know, talking about China cymbals, of course, because you know. That's
Exactly.
Anyway, he's looking up at my bobblehead.
That's cool. I don't know where I got this. I think somebody gave me this a long time ago, and I used to keep it in my old office and at work, and now I have it here in my little home office. And
just to keep it real, I got this guy too. It doesn't bobble, but just to, you know, it's not all rock 24/7 around here.
Okay. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. That's cool. Well, I was going to ask you, Mike, I made a couple of notes here, questions. What are some of your favorite, not your absolute, but like, what are some of your favorite Stones records? And part B of that would be like, so, you know, songs that you feel Charlie is best represented in. Like if you were going to tell somebody, you know, someone who said, Charlie doesn't do much for me, what songs would you recommend they listen to really kind of highlight Charlie?
I'll tell you what, first, definitely Exile on Main Street to me is like the pinnacle of the culture, not just the Rolling Stones. It's like, you know, it's like the invention of cubism or something. I mean, it really is kind of like a shift in the way they play gospel and country and rock and roll. And, you know, like, it's just absolutely, you know, the apex of the art form. I should say on my website, MikeEdison.com, easy enough, there are playlists. There's Spotify playlists, and there are 4 of them. One is, it's like kind of Blues 101, but I think it's got some surprises. It includes Flamingo and Walking Shoes, some of Charlie Watts' early favorite songs, and goes through Muddy Waters and Helen Wolf and Don Covey and stuff they cover. And then I move through some of my favorite Disco Stone songs and some of the live stuff. And there are 4 separate playlists. I think people will be surprised what I chose. And the great thing, you know, on Exxon on Main Street, so you listen to it, it's wonderful. And I was just listening today, Rip This Joint, which I think is the very fastest song that they ever recorded. I mean, I
would say so. Yeah.
And it's great on, you know, on the record. It's just a swing and jump and jive. Another really sleazy song. It's you know, about the President of the United States and drugs and sex. You know, a theme they'd come back to, you know, on Some Girls. But when you hear them doing it live, like after, like if you watch them in Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, this is the thing. This is the document. This is like, if you're in a rock and roll band and you watch this movie, it kind of makes you rethink what you're doing and like, really, maybe I should just quit right now, because it's so untouchably good. And even after writing a book about Charlie Watts, the Rolling Stones, and absorbing all this, I turned it on the other night for the first time in a while, you know, and I was just dumbfounded at how freaking good they were at that moment. You know, I mean, if Richard Nixon was paying attention, he would have put them in jail. He should have. He should have put a stop to the whole freaking thing. I mean, it was absolutely, you know, rock and roll as revolution in its purest form. It was glam. It was sleazy. It was sexy. It was the very nexus of like drugs and eyeliner and men with guitars. It was perfect. Perfect. So Exile to me is, you know, just doesn't get any better. I mean, even the filler songs in Exile are good. you know, a run through.
I agree.
I just want to see his face, which is just fantastic. Or Stop Breaking Down, just a little, you know, that could have been, it's not the most important song on the record, and it's just better than, you know, their worst stuff is better than someone else's best stuff.
I totally agree.
Really,
I mean, and the fact that it you know, came out as a 2-album set, which was unusual. It wasn't, you know, it's not that no one had done that, but it was very unusual in those days to have 18 studio songs in a record and you know, and it, you know, with basically 2 hit singles, but a lot of really great deep tracks that many that could have been singles. You know, you
And
could have
they've
put,
been classics, if not singles. We all know "Shine a Light." We all know "Happy."
yeah,
And obviously, "Tommy
exactly.
Dice" was like a huge hit and was covered by a lot of people. But I mean, everybody loves "Rocks Off" and "All Down the Line." I mean, just song for song, pound for pound, it's the best.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure
Yeah.
this is going to make me a lot of friends. But this is the problem with the Beatles. I'm coming right at you. I'm coming right at you. I like that for a segue. Is that for a band that's so venerated, their bad song to good song ratio is unfortunate. You know, the White Album is not as consistent as, I'm being kind here, is not the model of consistency and excitement that Exile on Main Street is. You
Yeah.
know, there are no obladi obladas on Exile. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, to be fair to the Beatles,
Is that even on the White Album? I don't even know. But Rocky Raccoon is, and
I think it is on the White Album. Yeah. But yeah, I think they were experimenting a lot at that time, and
I'm all
as we
for
know,
experiments, but experiments are like children, and they should be seen and not heard.
and the thing we've learned about the White Album is that the band was breaking up at that point. I mean,
You know what
they
track
weren't enjoying.
I love this track. It's the demo version. It came out on like, when they started releasing like the complete White Album, master, complete, whatever stuff. I don't know what version of it is, but it's like a 16-minute version of Helter Skelter. And it's like this incredibly slow tempo. And I love it. And this to me is why Ringo was a great drummer. It's get, and it's just really pulsing and it's really cool, And by the way, I mean, speaking of Ringo, I just want to say that when the Beatles did break up, despite whatever problems I may or may not have with them, here are four guys. They could have called anybody in the world to play drums, and they all called Ringo.
Right.
What does that tell you about Ringo Starr?
Exactly. And that whole business about John Lennon supposedly saying Ringo's not even the best drummer in the Beatles is a total made up.
That's apocryphal. That's not real.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, Ringo. But here's an interesting thing: is so in the course of writing this book, I find a couple of records that Ringo Starr and Charlie Watts both play on, which it's a very happy confluence of things for us nerds.
Yeah.
They're drum nerds. It's Leon Russell's first record,
Yeah.
because they're just a studio thing, and Leon Russell knows everybody in the universe, and it's the coolest thing. So they do an early version of what would become "Shine a Light," and he's got Mick Jagger and Bill Wyman on it, but Ringo's playing drums. Right. So you can compare it it's almost apples to apples to the song that became "Shine a Light," but you could also compare Ringo's playing on the London Howlin' Wolf sessions. Right, he made it onto. He came down the first day. He only made it onto like one, maybe two songs, I think, on the final product. There's some outtakes, and then Charlie played the rest of it, and you could tell why it's Charlie, because he swings in a way in which Ringo was not capable. Ringo had a thing, but he kind of makes it as funky in his little Ringo way. Charlie knows how to swing like a Chicago cat.
Yeah,
he really knows how to take it in that direction in a way the guys around him feel it. It doesn't sound like anything else but the blues. It's just incredible.
He's absolutely very authentic when it comes to that. And my friend Bob Sullivan commented back a couple of comments ago. We were talking about songs, and he mentioned "Monkey Man" as a song that represents Charlie and
very much so.
Yeah,
he did that little thing that's like kind of a drag, or or whatever. Boom, boom, and Charlie's right hand seems stronger than his left hand, and that's a song that you can really hear it. Because it's just a little uneven as he's going around. There's a great thing. There's a Charlie cam of Monkey Man on YouTube somewhere. Right, where it's just the drums, and you can really see it. It's just that little buzz, that ghost note, and it just really puts it over. That intro is pure Charlie. Absolutely.
I tell you I remember the first time I listened to that song and that whole record, "Let It Bleed," but that record's got so many great songs on it. But that particular song, and I come back to it today as like I think you talked about this in your book too, and I've referred to it the same way. He plays the drums like it's an orchestra. Like and people watching this might laugh at that assessment, but he plays a 4-piece drum set with 2 cymbals and a pair of hi-hats, and he gets so much music out of those drums, out of a tiny kit, literally a ride and a crash cymbal, a crash ride and a crash.
Yeah, that's too much equipment.
And it's unbelievable what comes out of what he can do on that particular song, or many songs, but that particular.
Yeah, let's take a trip down to New Orleans and see what guys can do with a snare drum and a bass drum and nothing else. And just swing the living hell out of it all day long. You lead a parade with a snare drum. I got nothing against big drum sets per se, but where's that really at? Charlie shows what you can do. More is often less.
Yeah.
That is coming from a big Keith Moon fan too, but
Yeah, and
every
the
dog has his
funny,
day, right?
yeah, and the funny thing about Keith Moon is, comparatively to Charlie, he played a big drum set. But if you look at if you look at Keith's sort of classic setup, it was maybe 3 to 4 mounted toms, the 2 bass drums, snare drum, and maybe 1 floor tom or 2, and only like maybe 2 or 3 cymbals. He didn't play that many cymbals compared to the number of drums.
Well, beneath it all is just the Charlie Watts set. Beneath all,
Yeah.
this like stuff that's growing like ivy, these tom-toms that are just sort of exploding everywhere. It's just a snare drum and a bass drum, or 2 bass drums, which you use occasionally. But it's very, very basic, and no hi-hat for Keith, of course. But the bottom line, you got to keep that beat. You got to keep that backbeat going. That's what's going to keep the song going. And for all the other stuff, which is very exciting, it's like Jackson Pollock, the splatter painting and stuff. It's just fantastic. But it works for him. Like, always say too, for you art nerds out there, you can always tell a fake Jackson Pollock. Like when someone, anybody could do that. My kid could do that. A monkey could do that. Just throwing paint on a canvas. But when it's not done by someone who's feeling it, you can tell in like 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. There's an ersatz quality there. If you don't have it, you don't have it. It's not just throwing paint. There's rhythm in it. There's sense to it. There's time, feeling, and it's controlling time and space. And Keith Moon could do it. A million other guys can't, obviously. Well, and a million other bands that wouldn't tolerate it. It's very lucky to be in a band that were that fit to find the right guys, because Keith Moon, couldn't play in the Rolling Stones any more than Charlie Watts could play in the Who. And we saw that with Kenny Jones. On paper, he was the right guy. But when it came down to it, like I said, it was replacing Jackson Pollock with a house painter. Kenny Jones was great in the faces. He was not the right guy for that job. Yeah. And then they found Zach Starkey, who is the right guy for the job.
Absolutely.
Oddly enough, he understood the implications of Keith Moon without having to, copy him, and could keep it exciting. And, when I saw them play, it seemed like he was pushing Pete Townsend, like they had a little competition, let's see who can, throw this a little bit harder. And that's kind of what drove the Who. And, the bass player's job is kind of to ride herd and keep some, which is great because Entwistle played so much, but really he's kind of holding it together.
Yeah.
That barrage of notes. It's like, that's kind of the organizational system, this crazy, abstract, expressionism rock and roll band.
Yeah, no, I agree. I look at Zach as being like a more kind of refined version of Keith, like all the good parts of Keith Moon, and not to say there are bad parts, but all the good parts of Keith Moon, but with a much more sensible, understanding of what his job is in the band, of keeping good time, and he was, Keith was his idol, and his dad Ringo is Keith's best friend, so there's a real connection there, and
he's got provenance.
yeah.
But it's true though. You don't want the next Keith Moon, but he gets it. He knows when to push. He knows how to control. He knows how to have fun. He knows when to pull the trigger when you need to. I think Zach's great. I was bitter. I wanted that job. I told you before. That's a job I want. I was ready.
Well, they tried reaching you, but you were vacationing somewhere at the time, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I was at my chalet in Spain.
So give me some other Mike Edison favorite Stones records. We talked about Some Girls before we were live, which
Some Girls,
one of our favorites.
And I think it's just brutal, and ditto like the Exile on Main Street experience. By the time they got it on the road, it was just flying. It was just blasting. So Some Girls, and first of all, it starts with a disco song, and this is Mick, obviously. Disco, everybody says, it's all about disco and punk, the 70s disco and punk. And I laugh because anybody who was there knows it was really about Jethro Tull and Styx in Kansas and the Outlaws. And disco and punk were kind of like, like when I was in high school, if you were a punk rocker, you were definitely a freak or a weirdo, And, and disco, by the time it kind of bubbled up into the consciousness of the people that I knew, had gone from the sound of Philadelphia to the sound of the shopping mall. It had really become diluted, and it wasn't really what I would call great black dance music anymore, which the Stones played, and they were great. They were much hipper to it. Pink Floyd had a disco song. Paul McCartney went for it. All these people, the Kinks tried a disco song.
Right, yeah.
But the Stones were playing black dance music and doing a great job of it for a very, very long time.
Mm.
You know,
Hmm.
I mean, they knew these guys, right? I mean, my God, they knew Marvin Gaye, you know, they knew James Brown, they knew all these people. You know, they weren't Johnny Come Latelys, you know, like Pink Floyd trying to put a disco song on their science fiction dystopian epic. Is a little cynical, you know, in my book. But the rest of this record, you know, I know they had to chase the punk rockers away a little bit, prove that they still had it. They were coming off of a couple of records that were disappointing. I love Black and Blue too, but that's guys playing in a room that shows that they're, you know, but as a, you know, as a, you know, it's only rock and roll. You know, there's something a little bit missing, you know, from that record. And I think Goat's Head Soup too. They sounded a little bit murky. Jimmy Miller's relationship with them was getting
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
weird plays. There were a lot of drugs going around, and you know, I mean, Keith said, you know, Mick was like, you know, jetting off to L.A. and Hollywood, and I was like jetting off to Dopesville. You know, it just was not like the best time to cohese as a group, but with Some Girls, they brought it all together again, and I think they really wanted it, and they had something to prove, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
They were like, fuck you guys, we are the world's greatest rock and roll band,
Yeah.
and they proved it. And if you listen to the like the live in Texas, Some Girls live in Texas, I think it's brutal. Try playing along with that. The
I
tempos
know. Yeah.
are incredible, and again with Charlie, like with opening the hi-hat, the weirdest places, they did not sound like the Sex Pistols or the Ramones or the Clash, not at all. You know,
No, they still sounded like the Stones, which
they're
was
all country
cool.
songs. If you listen to
Yeah.
them, I mean, it's punk. It's got the energy. It's nasty and it's sleazy. And I don't know how they got away with, you know, the song "Some Girls." They're still playing it in their set, and you know,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, you know, my goodness. I mean, just, you know, it's other times. It's fine. I got personally, I got no problem. You know, as long as it's nothing's mean spirited, so I'm cool with it. You know, but man, it's just like sleazy punk rock. But when you break it down, it's just two chords, Chuck Berry. That's it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
when we were doing the party for Sympathy for the Drive's looking for my Lucille Ball mask, but it's in the other room. We put together the Some Girls tribute band, the Lucille Balls, just to play a couple songs. And then we realized when we broke it down with my friends from the Flesh Tones and my buddy Bob Burt played drums, who's been in Sonic Youth and Pussy Galore, and is a great local drumming superstar. But the weird thing is when we put it together, we realized that Miss You, Whip Comes Down, Shattered,
Respectable.
they're all two chords. They're based on the same hard
Yeah.
rock. That's it. They're just rocking between two chords. And what can you do with it? And they won. They won that battle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just incredible. And by the time they got it on the road, you watch those videos, like, you know, they're just really spitting it. They're throwing fire. It's really good.
Yeah. No, I agree. It was a turning point, I think, too, where a lot of people thought that was it. You know, they'd written them
Yeah.
off, and
Oh, they were
critics
called
had,
house bands when It's
yeah.
Only Rock and Roll came out. Lester Bangs was
Right.
like saying, you know, the idea of a 30-year-old playing this music. I mean, no one could anticipate, you know, Bruce Springsteen being 75 years old and, you know, and still playing 4-hour shows. It just wasn't in the culture at the time.
No,
That
absolutely
generation
not.
to superannuate, you know, and still show up for work on time.
Right on. Yeah. No, I agree. Um, oh, my friend Neil Porter really likes the Flowers album. That's going back.
Okay.
That's a great album.
Yeah, I like that too. You know, I
Yeah.
think the great thing about Charlie and the Stones, but since we're talking about Charlie Watts, is a certain evolution. You know, where, you know, you hear him play on those early records, and it's good. And, you know, I always like Satisfaction was kind of a turning point, especially if you listen to like the live version they put out. It's very punk. It's very driving. It's much more direct. I don't know if it's a combination of like him getting more self-confidence in the group and them moving away from being honestly a very talented cover band, which is really what they were on their first couple of
Yeah.
records, you know,
Right.
to really, making it their thing. But then when you get from that to like GimMe Shelter, it's like a different guy. And then when you get from GimMe Shelter to Some Girls, and Some Girls is when he starts really opening up the hi-hat in the weird places, and all of a sudden there's this China cymbal that like
Right.
where'd that come from? Because at that point, the only time you saw a China cymbal was if you went to see Rush or something. You know, it didn't make sense for a blues band to have a big old China cymbal in the kit. And it sounded so right though. It was like
Right.
big noisy trash can cymbal. And I was like, wow, like new dimension in percussion. Charlie.
And the funny thing was, you're right. He played it on Some Girls on that record. If you listen to it, and I have, it's not on every song. It's on the song Some Girls, obviously. It's on Respectable.
Yeah.
And it's sort of faintly in a couple of places. But all those songs from the next 2 or 3 records came from those sessions in Paris in 1977. And so by the time they got to Emotional Rescue, the record that had She's So Cold, and
which is great. She's So Cold has got that big.
It's just, that's his main crash, and it's been since 1978 or 1980 his main crash symbol.
And it's a key part of the sound now. You hear it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
Absolutely.
it's great. On the blues record they did, Blue and Lonesome, right? I love on the Howlin' Wolf song, which I love, Commit a Crime, which is one chord, which I'm a big fan of one chord songs. Just, you know, if you can do it with the riff and that, and you can put it over like that, that to me is a test of a great band, a great blues band. You know, none of these clever turnarounds, you know, they don't sound like a bar band. I mean, you sound like, you know, real street level tough blues, but he's like wanging the living hell out of the China cymbal. There's no China cymbal in Howlin' Wolf's band. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, there's like, you know, at that point, it's like a prog rock toy. And it just sounds visceral and trashy and good. And there's no precedent for it, really.
No, and you know, the crazy
kind of sound on a Chicago blues song. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I was going to say too, the crazy thing about that too, I remember seeing them, I didn't see them in 78, which would have been the first tour that he used that China. I saw them in 81.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I saw them at Hartford because they didn't play in Boston on that tour. And I went out to see him at the Hartford Civic Center, whatever it was. And I had a pretty good seat. And I remember seeing him playing the China like a ride cymbal, to exactly what you're saying. It was the first time I'd seen anybody, let alone him, do that. And it's only an 18-inch cymbal to begin with, so it's pretty small to play as a ride anyway, you know, to get any sort of, and he had the kind of control, he's right-handed obviously, but he had the kind of control where he could play the thing like a ride with the edges turned up, and he plays almost like sort of on top of it, not so much on the edge, and I'm watching him playing like, I'm trying to think of a song where he was a pretty fast tempo tune, he's going, I'm going, wow, he's playing the China like a ride cymbal.
Yeah, and you know, and it gives you a lot of wash too, you know, but it's it's just a good, trashy, nasty sound. You know, it really does. I'm always amazed by his right hand. Watching like the Boogie Woogie band he had over the last few years, the ABC.
Oh yeah.
The Boogie Woogie, like, you know, which is like going right back to the beginning. And on the playlists I made, I believe the first song, and again, MikeEdison.com, please find me there, but check out the Charlie Watts playlist. I think it's the list called Charlie Takes Over, and it starts with Down the Road a piece, which had been like a, you know, jump and jive hit, and Chuck Berry had a hit with it. I forget who wrote it, but a bunch of people have done it. And you hear it's just, you know, it's just like incredible control. And then to hear him play the Boogie Woogie so many years later, it really is his right hand is driving that whole thing. It's incredibly hard to do.
He's got a great swing beat. Well, I was going to say, so, and to continue on, I'm going to interject on what I'm going to ask you, but to me, like what I've always tried to turn people onto back when, you know, when I was a kid and I'd have arguments with other drummers that would say, you know, he's not as good as John Bonham, or he's not as, you know, before the Neil Peart days, but I would refer to 19th Nervous Breakdown, which is some of the most. Very swinging. Oh my God!
Big ride cymbal part.
Yeah, I mean, and when you listen to what he's actually playing, and then the fills that he plays, and the way he executes those things, I mean, and you know, I don't know that he ever was able to do it again after that record. I don't know, but I don't say that in a disparaging way, but he went to another level to play the way he played on that song. I mean,
it's really great. And again, it's Charlie though. There's an evolution. You know, a lot of guys they arrive, the stork drops them off at the doorstep, and they're fully formed. John Bonham, the first guy, that first song on the first Led Zeppelin record, that's the John Bonham more or less you were getting across the spectrum. I mean, they played a little bigger, a little heavier, they recorded different, but that was John Bonham. He had the bass drum thing. Jimmy Page had a concept how to record him, and the sound. It was there. Keith Moon, boom, from day one. Charlie Watts, you know, I mean, the guy you're hearing, you know, on Some Girls is not the same girl that was playing on Flowers.
Right.
It's a pretty remarkable thing.
You're right. You're
absolutely. And the game sucked that. Go back to that crash symbol for a second, the China cymbal. Now you listen to, and I list them in Sympathy for the Drummer. You know, like on Voodoo Lounge, first song, crash. The second song, every song starts with the China cymbal because it's sort of like, you know, this semiotic experiment of signs and signifiers to let you know that you're listening to the Stones, you know, before Mick starts singing. You know, and that last, it was the Bigger Bang. Is that their last studio record, right?
Yeah, it was.
That's the first song, and it's like it's noisy, and all of a sudden you're like the snare drum that's completely overmodulated, just like completely ringing all over the place. It's so cool, and then and this giant China symbol's like, great, Stones. And then, things ball kind of rolls off the table after that, to be honest with you. But that is like the Stonesism they needed you to hear to let you know that this is it. This is really authentic Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And it's Charlie who's driving. It's not, it's not the sound of Keith's guitar. It's the sound of Charlie's snare drum and the,
Yeah.
and the, big guy.
I agree. And it's those kind of classic Motown intros that he's kind of does all the time now. Like they'd be sort of rare in the old days, but now it's kind of like a
right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just listening to Hitchhike, their version I was going through, versus the drums on the Marvin Gaye thing are fantastic. But Charlie too, I mean, he got it. He understood not just how to play it, but the implications of how to swing it,
Yeah.
it wasn't a copycat. It was, they brought something pretty cool to it.
Absolutely. Yep. No, this is great. And there's some great comments. So I'm going to try to read a couple of these to you. Let's see. If there's any questions. Hey, by the way, Don McCauley was on a second ago. We invited Don. For those of you who don't know who Don is, he's Charlie's drum tech, the one and only Don McCauley, legendary. But he's doing a session himself today, so he couldn't join us live today, but he's
all right, that Don.
Start this one too fast or too slow. He's giving us famous comments from singers to drummers. Want this, or do you want this one fast, or do you want this one too fast or too slow?
You know how it is. We were talking on the phone the other day. A band I was playing in, the Raunch Hands, which we're banned for a long time, and we're on Spotify and stuff. Anyone wants to hear me play the drums, playing kind of like an overheated R&B punk rock kind of thing, and of which I'm quite proud. But I remember my first gig, we were doing this song. I call it Hellbound. It's kind of like a punk rock gospel kind of thing, and it starts out this big kind of like, I call it right from the black church, just kind of amped up by a bunch of white kids who had too much to drink, and it sounded good and was driving it really hard, feeling really good, and the song was done. And the bass player looks at me, and he says, "Dude, you play that song that fast again, I'm gonna shove my bass up your ass." And within 1 second, the guitar player looks at me and says, "That was fucking awesome. Play every song like that."
Classic, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I went with the guitar player. I sided with the guitar player on that.
Well, I don't know if Neil Porter is still watching from my band Grand Theft Audio, but that's a classic. I think I told you this the other day. Classic scenario is we'll be doing a song and I'll count it and start it, and Neil will look at me and kind of give me this look like, and Neil sings most of the songs, and he'll look at me and go like it's kind of fast, slow down. And then I'll look over at Paul Gianelli to my left, and he'll look at me and either nod his head or go like, pick it up.
Yeah, there's because I play the guitar and sing a lot too, right? Sort of, New York City is the least friendly place in the world for drummers. So who knows? Had I not been, living in New York my whole life, maybe I'd be playing the drums more often. And I do play as often as I can, but I've been leading bands, playing guitar and singing, playing a little piano occasionally. And it is kind of tough to bring the drummer along with you, or to make them lay back. And yeah, I mean, I'm hard on drummers, because I am one, and I do get the whole thing. You know how a drummer's. When there's a drummer at your door, right? He speeds up.
Of course, yeah.
But even as a singer too, it's like someone's like, Jesus Christ, I can't get all the words in, or or to hold it back, and that's when you start realizing like how great. Like I mean, Mick does it great when the tempos are right, but like Frank Sinatra, who's singing so far behind the beat, it's so cool. It's really sexy. It's just a different approach to it that it's not everything like this, which is I mean, that's the Ramones, and that's perfect. I mean,
exactly.
By the way, I think I'm the only person ever to call the Ramones virtuosos. But like I say to all you Rush fans out there, yeah, give it a go. Have a go playing like the Ramones and report back. Let me know how that goes, because it's not easy to play at that tempo evenly and make it swing, and to get 3 other people in the room that feel the same thing that you're feeling.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah,
to play that fast and not have it be a train wreck. No, but I was going to say exactly what you said too. And I was making light of that, but I'm super tempo conscious when we play. I have an app that I use to at least count me in.
Right.
And I'm super critical of myself with my tempos and my time. And I always want to make it feel right for everybody. But it's just one of those things where I joke with the guys, because Neil and Paul, the other Paul Candelori, he's sort of neutral on the whole thing, or he'll just kind of usually turn around and kind of go like, yeah, man, this feels great, you know. But I'll have one guy telling me, you know, pick it up, speed it up, and then I'll have Neil, who's singing, you know, a lot of the songs, turn around going, what this look like, you know. But and I can certainly tell when it's too fast. I can tell when it's you know, and if he's trying to get all the words out. But
the problem is when it starts off too fast, then you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
You know, well, you know, we were talking about tempo on our phone call the other day, and I've become like the sort of like tempo obsessive. I sent you a couple of tracks. I don't know if you have a second to listen, but like Lonely Avenue, Ray Charles. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
It's Dr. John called it the Junkers Blues, because that's the way junkies used to shuffle down the street. You know, it's you know, one hair slower and it's just going all to hell, but one hair faster and it doesn't have that weird lurch to it. It doesn't feel, you know, sexy and a little warped. To me, Lonely Avenue is just like the coolest tempo, and the slow tempos are hard. And you know, we were talking about Tumbling Dice being like the Stones' great example of a song that lives very, very specifically in a tempo. And I mean, I think it's pretty much a straight quote from Keith. He says, yeah, you hot it up too much and you're rushing it. And if you slow it down, it drags. It's very specific where it lives. And Mick always wants to pick it up because it rocks a little. I mean, you think it rocks a little bit more, but that's fool's gold, because really, you know, you got to like have faith in the tempo. I know that everybody wants to rock harder, and it feels like my band, Edison Rocket Train, that I played, my whole thing when I was doing is like, I'm just afraid to play not, you know, in fifth gear, that I'd somehow lose someone's attention. Now, you know, like like that fellow Paul wrote to that fellow the Corinthians. You know, when I was a child, I played with childish things, and now I'm a man and I've put down such things. I feel confident playing slower songs. You know, I feel better playing a ballad. I feel much better playing slower on the drums, and I know no one's going anywhere. If I play with confidence and I believe in what I'm doing, ain't no one going nowhere. You know, I mean, playing at slow tempos, but you know. I think Mick, even at this late age, still has that fear a little bit. It's a big stadium. If I don't rock and roll them all night long, you know, they might go get some popcorn or something. And they fight about it. I know, you know, beat up. He's like, no, I understand they have the keyboard player. They don't play in a click, right? They don't play in a click track, but he counts in the tempos. The tempos are marked at the beginning. And then from there, you know.
He's the MD, and I've been to their rehearsals where he's calling the shots, and he'll say, you know, if you've ever seen their set lists, they have the time, they have the tempos charted out on the set list, and every song.
And the keys too, because after all these years, they can't remember what that you know, Midnight Riders and you know, Open G capoed up to the 10th fret. I mean, still got to be reminded of that.
No, but you know, you make a good point, Mike. I think, you know, you know from playing in a band, I know that you can't get the nuance in a song like a Tumbling Dice at a fast tempo. I mean, to me, that where that song lives on the record is magical, because Charlie's able to pull off all that stuff that he can't really do live.
Tempo. And I love, when I was a kid, I practiced that beginning, that and you know, as a kid, that was missed. By now, it's second nature. But to know where the you know, boom, that's just a thing of beauty. You know, it falls together, and you know, any faster, and you know, I mean, Rip This Joint, that's the fast song. It's the same thing. It's the same two notes, right? Yeah. Just two good whacks on the snare drum. You know, it's a
whole different thing, though. Yeah. Absolutely.
Apparently it took them like 140 takes to Keith was happy with the tempo. You know, they were there for like, you know, 20 hours in a row. You know, people were just dropping, and Keith said, no, let's do it again.
And I think too, wasn't the song, I think and I think the actual arrangement of the song too, right? I mean, they just could not really, everybody couldn't be in sync with just, you know, where the stops were, where the breakdown was, and all that stuff. And
there's so much myth, you know, surrounding that record in the basement, you know, and French stuff. But don't forget, I mean, they brought it out to LA and they sweetened it there. A lot of it was recorded at a proper recording studio in Los Angeles. Right. All the backing vocals, a lot of the horns, all the vocals that you're hearing, I don't think much was really done in the basement. I mean, they were super creative, and a lot of the, you know, it was all done down there. But that record got finished in you know, a proper studio in Los Angeles. And, you know, I know it's more romantic to think, you know, they did it in like some form of Gestapo hideout in France while they're, you know, junkie tax exiles, but it, you know.
But it's cool to note though that, like the drums, for example, I mean, they got an amazing drum sound in that basement, because
Yeah.
those are what you hear. I mean, what you
Yeah.
got out of Keith's basement is, were the final, I mean, I think it's one of the best sounding, sonically, one of the best sounding drum records it's just so natural sounding.
When it came out, it got attacked for being murky sounding,
Yeah,
and I think it sounds real. But I love the
absolutely.
sound,
Yeah.
of the Little Richard record. I mean, what is it? How many mics do you think were in the room at Specialty Records where Little Richard went in and cut "Good Golly Miss Molly," like a ribbon mic hanging over the piano, and maybe another one hanging over the drums, and
Right.
and let's go. But I mean, Little Richard used to record after doing gigs, right? They'd play like 3 sets in the club and then go to the recording studio at 2 a.m. So they were like on fire, and record
Yeah.
one take for like "Good Golly Miss Molly," or these are the greatest rock and roll songs of all time, because they were on fire. You could hear the sweat on Exile, which is what's nice about it. It really feels like guys in a room working together, which you start to lose, obviously, across the continuum of Rolling Stones records, to the point when you get to Dirty Works, they literally weren't in the same room.
No. No.
Which begs the question: how do you make a Rolling Stones record with no Rolling Stones?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have a question from Eric Davidson. Hey, Mike, what do you think of the Stones' Blue and Lonesome record from a couple of years ago, which you hit on a second ago, but maybe you can talk about that for Eric Davidson. Thanks for the question, Eric.
I think we're all pretty much agreed. I mean, people I know, I was like really surprised. I picked it up, said, "Well, this will be Troll, the Rolling Stones playing the blues." I mean, cool. And then I was surprised at how much I kept playing it. Like it just kept going back on the turntable over and over again. And my house is filled with Muddy Waters records and Howlin' Wolf records and Bo Diddley records and Magic Sam records and and all this stuff. And yeah, this was good. The biggest fear is you never know which Mick you're going to get, right? The Mick that he thinks that people want, or the Mick that actually is a genius blues musician, can settle down. He's an unbelievably good harmonica player and a great singer and a real student of the art form. And when he can settle down into that and isn't more concerned about like running back and forth across the stage, and that's the Mick we got, thank God. And it's great. Yeah. It's really great, and I love that Charlie beats the hell out of the China cymbal on those songs.
And I further to that too, and no criticism on Mick, because I think he's an important part of what's kept the Stones going all these years, needless to say. But I think he gets hung up, and again, I simply, here I am like pontificating about Mick Jagger, but I think that there's this sort of internal situation with him and Keith where Mick is always trying to be not current, but he wants to be playing music and writing music that you're hearing on the radio now.
Anything that Keith hasn't said, a dozen times. Yeah. He always wants to make the record that he heard in the club last night.
Yeah. And Keith wants it to sound like the Stones. And I'm on Keith's side of the equation.
Like I was saying to you the other day when we were talking, I get the idea that Mick's relationship is with the audience and Keith's relationship is with the music. It just, and that's where it's at. He's not so concerned with the trappings of show business, and and that's great. It's Mick's job. He's the greatest frontman in the history of the sport. I mean, there's no question about it. And you think you finally say, well, I think Mick's kind of important. Yeah. Like I was saying to my wife just this morning, honey, I think you're an important part of this relationship. Yeah, of course. But it's nice when he could settle down and just do that thing that he's so good at without really worrying, about what other people are going to think, because he's really, really good. And Mick, when God forbid the day comes when they write his obituary, they're going to say he's the greatest rock star of all time. And I hope someone remembers to say he's one of the great lyricists of all time.
Absolutely.
But that's going to get lost in the thing. But read the lyrics to Exile on Main Street. They're dark and blue and beautiful, and they very, very tactile and wonderful. Like really.
Yeah, and other records too. But I have to just repeat a comment from my friend Brian County, who lives in the Boston area. We were talking about Blue and Lonesome. He gave me a copy of that at a gig. He came to see my band play and laid a copy of the CD on me, which was really nice. And thank you, Brian. And he comments, Mike talks faster than Rip This Joint. I just thought I'd share that with you.
Well, it was slower when the studio record came out. Now we're doing it live.
Oh man. And I agree with Bob Sullivan. I think Mick is the best frontman on the planet. And so
Yeah,
Mike,
I mean, Mick's the guy, you know. I mean, everybody that I love, that I consider a great frontman, whether it's Iggy Pop or Lux Interior or Jim Morrison, who I run a little hot and cold with, honestly. But they're all come after Mick Jagger.
yeah,
Mick was the guy that made that thing. Now, yeah, I mean, James Brown's watching him and thinking Mick owes me a few bucks, but yeah, it's Mick. It's all Mick,
yeah.
and you know, I mean, it's incredible. And I love watching on. Everybody's got to watch. If you're a Stones fan and you've never seen Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, and it's great because they're playing next to each other. The stage is
Right.
only about as big as my bedroom. It's not like this gigantic arena, this Olympic-sized swimming pool of a stage. They're standing, right next to each other, and he's on the mic stand.
I love it.
And he's
I
moving.
love
He
it.
doesn't stop.
Yeah.
But man, they are together, and it is like it's a much different presentation than what it would become.
Yeah. Keith and Mick Taylor and Bill Wyman have cords on their guitars to their amplifiers. You know what I mean? It was back in the days when you had about 20 feet to roam around.
Yeah, they should bring
before
that
you
back.
came on. Yeah, I know. I love that. Whenever I watch it all the time too. Well, not pretty often. And I'll put the DVD in, or I'll go onto YouTube and I'll just, up in my favorites, there's a bunch of songs that are saved up there. And there's just, I mean, they were just so real and they were so on top of their game to begin with. And my favorite period is the Mick Taylor period. I love Ronnie Wood. I think Ronnie's a really underrated guitar player. Yeah, he gets a bum rap from some hardcore Mick Taylor fans, but
oh please, give me a break.
I know. People need to get a life.
And we talked about it in my book, which you can get a signed copy. Just give me a holler on Facebook, and we'll make sure we get one to you in time for Christmas. Or find me at my website, MikeEdison.com. But as I say, like Mick Taylor was kind of like the designated hitter, the gaudy home run hitter, the power forward you needed for a couple seasons so you could win the cup. He was never going to be a Rolling Stone forever and ever. He was that guy, and he was great. And there's no, he is Exile on Main Street. We talked about it, but
absolutely,
he was
Sticky
obviously
fingers,
replaceable. And Ronnie, at this point, he's the third guy to sit in that chair. But at this point, no Ronnie, no Stones either. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I'll say this with tremendous respect for Mick Taylor, because I as I said, I mean, my favorite period, I listened to that period more than anything.
That's 4 or 5 records in a row.
As we do, yeah. And for people who don't know, that's the period from a little bit of Let It Bleed, a couple of songs, but it was like Get Your Yeah-Yeahs Out, the live record, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Goat Said Soup, It's Only Rock and Roll. That's all Mick Taylor. But when I saw them in 2012 and 2013, when Mick was back in the band, it was so great to see him, but he wasn't the Mick Taylor that we remember from 1972 and 1969.
But nobody is. Come on.
Yeah.
If you look at Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones was 72, and if you hear like some of the bootlegs that are now coming out, officially, live at the Roundhouse, live at the Marquee, that stuff. Was it like live at the Roundhouse? Stuff on the Sticky Fingers Deluxe version. The Brussels affair is amazing.
Brussels stuff is
what blows my mind is at the end of. I think it's at the Roundhouse. It comes with the Sticky Fingers Deluxe CD package, and it's on Spotify and streaming, whatever. So you don't have to go out and spend $1 million on it. The version of Live With Me is like one of the most brutal things I've ever heard in my life. I mean, Mick Taylor, it's like Charlie's just like, I mean, he's just like, just nailing the history of rock and roll to the cross. I mean, it is unbelievable. It is just furious. And then Midnight Rambler, which is this like symphony of violence. It's so heavy and so dirty and so threatening sounding. And Charlie changing tempos and moving between the swing beat and the straight ahead rock and roll thing, and then picking up the tempo and then pulling back and and Mick singing about like this violence, like it's pretty dark. It's incredible. You couldn't do it now. It wouldn't happen. And, whether Mick Taylor made, I mean, he's obviously on all those records, but he was a part of the time when they truly were the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Like nothing even came close. Nothing's come close since, frankly. I know I don't want to be sound like a dinosaur, like, okay, boomer, like, wow. Because I do believe people make good music, and I believe there are lots of kids making stuff, but, you watch that and you just got to rethink what the hell you're doing, I mean,
But those versions, like you say, those live versions of like Midnight Rambler, there from even from Get Your Yeah-Yeahs Out, which was Mick Taylor's first tour with him,
Right.
to how it evolved to 73 in Brussels, which
It's
he was
incredible. The
like,
difference between 69 and 1970 or 69 and it's light years. Like the Stray Cat Blues on Get Your Eyes Out, it's kind of loping and it's kind of much. And then all of a sudden it became this very vindictive, you know, very, you know, it was hard. It was like an indictment of the culture at some point versus, you know, it was a real shift.
Yeah, I love that about them, how they obviously just and it was all a result of playing those songs live. You know what I mean? They recorded them one way, and so many of them never sounded the same when they played them live, and then they just kept evolving.
Which is again why the Rolling Stones are always better than the Beatles. In case anybody was wondering the question, it's because the Beatles stopped playing in 1966. That's it.
Well, this is true.
They stopped playing, and the Rolling Stones just fed off of it. Okay, and if you were to say 1970 or 1969, who's the best band? Well, it's the one that I can go see at Madison Square Garden, blowing the tops off the heads of people. You know, not the guys making an art rock record in the studio, which is fine, and I approve of that sort of behavior too. But if you want to know who's the best rock and roll band, it's the guys that are out there playing Midnight Rambler.
Yeah. Yep. No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I've seen them many times. Well,
where does the time go?
Yeah, where does the time go? I was going to say we've been at it for an hour and 15 minutes already. Wow. And but let's just talk for another couple of minutes and see if there are any other questions, because this is great. I'm having such a great time. I was going to show you.
Too, and, John, thank you. Like I said, guys like you and our friend Don McCauley. I mean, you guys make this a good tour for me. It's
pleasure.
Guys who are legit.
Wow.
who can get the writing, because people always say to me, and the story. I mean, Charlie Watts did call me, which is really very sweet.
Yes. I want to have you tell that story.
I'm not really starstruck, but it's like, I mean, by nature, it's not kind of where I'm at, but it was like really kind of humbling, very flattering and humbling to get the call. But I didn't write the book to be friends with Charlie Watts, and someone says, so did you talk to the Stones and wrote the book? Look, I made a very perfunctory investigation about an interview, but the truth is I'm better off not talking to them, because they're not my sources and I don't owe them anything, and I feel no obligation to be nice to them, which is, as a journalist, that's where I want to be. I can call them out on their own bullshit without fear of some publicist calling me up or saying, what the hell, I can't believe you said that about Mick, after he was so nice to you. You're like I just gotta call it like I see it. That's just the way it is. And there's no bullshit in the book, and it's better that way, and it's the way it's got to be. I think music writing, I'm a writer, right? And I've written a lot of books, and I hope people will discover my other writing through this book, but I'm not a music writer per se. I do write a lot about music. It's always drifting through my books, and I've written for Spin and some other things, and here and there when it happens. But I think the whole business is completely corrupt. Like seriously, if I read one more 5-star review of a mediocre Bruce Springsteen record, I'm gonna fucking shoot somebody. I don't want to be a press flack for somebody else. I don't mind being a cheerleader for rock and roll. I believe in rock and roll. My heart of hearts. If you need a shot of salvation, that's where I'm going. Right on Main Street. But but I don't need to lie about it. I don't need to prop up the corporate industrial rock complex either. And that's what my book aimed to be, about the drums and rock and roll and Grease and sex and and everything that was wrong as well as everything that was right. And I think that's why it's resonated with so many people, because it isn't a puff piece about Charlie Watts. I mean, Charlie matters, but it's not just fluff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you talked about this the other day when we spoke on the phone too, that your publisher wasn't keen on you doing this book, but I think you realized, and they didn't realize, that the market potential, the interest there is in writing a book about Charlie. But I just hold that thought for 1 second, because my good friend Jeff McAllister, a fine drummer also, and a big fan of Charlie. Do you know Jeff?
Through Facebook.
Great. Okay.
Of digital technology, we're buddies.
Yeah. And Jeff said, this is a good question. Did you notice the absence of the China on the Some Girls bonus tracks?
That's a very good question. And I'm a big fan of those bonus tracks. Best country record ever made.
Yeah. And I would,
really going? I gotta listen. I'm gonna have to go through. I'll be honest, like it didn't really occur to me. I know I mean, like I said, Some Girls is when it started just to bubble up. Emotional Rescue was more, and then
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
the drums were really tweaked to sound very rude on Tattoo You, and it became part of the sound. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what's that
And
country
here,
song about driving on the FDR and the Long Island Expressway? It's not on there because I think it's on Emotional Rescue, which is the same sessions, right? Some of it
yeah.
was
Yeah.
anyway.
Most
Um,
of it. Well,
Let
I'm
Me
going to give it
Go,
a
one of my
listen
favorite
too.
Stone songs, and of course She Was Hot. It's on all those songs.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say, I'm going to give it a listen, Jeff. And I think my theory is that as Mike was saying, it was sort of bubbling, that China was starting to happen. I think they probably cut a bunch of songs. Charlie got that flat ride during those sessions in 1977 at a drum shop in Paris that I know. I've been to, Le Begator, and it's like the big drum shop in Paris. And I know the owner, Philippe, and basically, I'm pretty sure that's when he got to China, was during that time. It's the first UFIP China. So my guess is they laid a bunch of tracks down. At some point, Charlie and Chooch went drum shopping, and Charlie has told the story that him and Chooch were bombed out of their heads when they found that flat ride. It was like in a used bin of, traded in cymbals that he picked up, at a song. And I think he probably heard the China and went, yeah, let's try this. And then they made a bunch of songs with the China after that. That's my theory.
Yeah, it's magic. Yeah, I just sort of, I love that he found that symbol on a used bin, that flat ride.
Yeah,
It's somebody else's discard. But that's the magic is right there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's, and he loves that flat ride.
It's incredible. Well,
Yeah,
he's got a sound, and like I said, and each record that they make, each studio record, they kept turning him up too, which I love. And the studio drums kept getting louder and louder and louder. Like at some point, they realized that it really is Charlie and his Rolling Stones.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, but Mike, I'm sorry. I cut you off. I think you were going to say something. I don't know if you remember what it was going to be, what it was, but I wanted to address Jeff's question. And
I don't know, we were talking about the flat ride. We're talking about country music. I made notes too. We're gonna have to meet up again because I got this big thing here. It says, but talking about the disco, their disco records, and there's just so much to talk
that would
about
be great.
Charlie Watts because I mean, bringing about Charlie too is his taste is very wide. Like and he liked going clubbing with Mick, which is a weird thing you wouldn't necessarily see because I'm Charlie Watts, I'm very all about Charlie Parker and and Miles Davis and Louis Armstrong and whatnot. But he was one of the guys that encouraged them to get Prince to open up for him, which was infamously disastrous. Gig at JFK Stadium, but he liked all the disco stuff, the dance music. He loved all
Yeah.
the OJs, the Sound of Philadelphia. Where Keith was a little bit like, fine, you guys go to Studio 54 or to whatever the disco they were hanging out in Munich. I'm gonna go home and listen to my Peter Tosh record.
Yeah.
Get out my Elmore James records. Charlie's got a very wide ranging taste. He's very very ecumenical that way, which I think is very, very wise. He's very embracing of the avant-garde too. You're talking about jazz, like really? Like Cecil Taylor or a lot of Mingus stuff that's not always the most accessible thing.
Right.
He's got great ears, Charlie, and that counts for an awful lot.
You're right. And he's such a walking encyclopedia of all that stuff. I knew he was a big fan of that music, but until we had a conversation one day about how deep he goes with it all. I mean, like, going way back to, the 30s and just like an encyclopedia of just
He's the only
records
guy.
of-
I've had the same music on my outgoing voicemail for 20 years. I got my first flip phone, and it's a little bit of Charlie Parker. It's what I was listening to at the time. So I was like, okay, make a voicemail. Boop, 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 boop. That sounds good. Haven't changed it. When he called me, he was the only person who's ever recognized it. And literally, it's like 8 seconds of music. And it's not even the saxophone. It's like a kind of piano gliss. And it's like, and it's literally like, 5 seconds of music. And he's like, oh, thank you for putting Charlie Parker on your voicemail. I really enjoyed that. He's the only one. 20 years.
That's great, man. And so, yeah, just really quick. So Don McCauley got word to Charlie that you'd written this book. And
Yeah, and I think a few copies got to him by various sources. I think once it sort of got into the into the bloodstream, to the water table or whatever, it sort of like it got to him. And Don had said, "Oh, I heard that one of his grandkid or his kid had gotten a copy for him." And I had sent a couple copies to Don, of course, to send over, and I had sent copies over to the Stones management just to make sure everybody was hip to it because everybody. I know everybody loves Charlie Watts. It's not honestly, I read a book about Mick Jagger. It does not have the same Zork, to use one of my favorite words,
Yeah.
that a book about Charlie has, and we really worked very hard to make it like a really nice book. My publisher Backbeat was really great to me about that. Like I designed the book myself largely, or I worked with a couple of guys very closely to make sure that it was like, book as object, not just a cheap
Yeah.
bio, and something you wanted to have in your home and feel good about, and and yeah, so that all that stuff, goes, counts for a lot. Presentation is everything, right? So
Sure. Yeah.
he called me up, and it was just, it was great. He actually left a message, and I called him back, and he was, you don't know me. My name is Charlie Watts, but I was like, I called him back. Like, hi, Mr. Watts. Yeah, I would not presume to call him Charlie. Mr. Watts. I'm old school like that. Although when I met Keith, I called him Keith. So take that with
Yeah.
it's everything in its right moment. I strive to be a mensch. Let's just say that. So, Mr. Watts, my name's
And
Mike
you are.
Edison, and you just left me this message. And he goes, Mike, someone gave me this lovely book that you wrote about me. Thank you so much. That's really terrific, And I said, well, thank you. And we talked for a moment about some of the old blues guys. I said, I like talking about that and this, but I thought I was being pranked, though. That's
Yeah.
I was not sure, because it's not likely, but certainly probable that someone could be pranking me. So I had to ask him the secret drummer's question to make sure it was him. But that's between me and Charlie. I'm not telling anybody what I asked him. And he's like, okay, swordfish, like, okay,
Password is swordfish. Yeah.
oh wow, it really is Charlie Watts. It's so cool. Because I mean, not for nothing, I was thinking about Charlie Watts when I got my first drum set, when I was 13. And I bought my first drum set with some bar mitzvah money. I set up in my basement, and I'd playing along with Brown Sugar. And I've been thinking about it like, this is not like the other things. This is just not like the other things. There's something, and I love playing along with Black Sabbath, the Wizard and War Pigs and all these great fills, and I love Mitch Mitchell. I learned a lot from that, and like a little bit of Led Zeppelin, and later like some of the Ramones, and Sex Pistols, and all sorts of things, But the Stones, man, that was like, there was something else going on there, I mean, they're the ones that had like the zipper and the underpants on the cover. It's like, oh shit. I'm just, there's a mystique about the band, but the music itself has a mystique about it, like how it got created, how it got to that place. Where a lot of the other things you could sort of, okay, you can figure it out. The blueprints could be drawn up. We tried to diagram a couple Charlie Watts parts, Kenny Aronoff and I, and he was just like, yeah, this is like insane. It's like, it doesn't really follow any known rules. He bends time here. And it's very hard to write it down.
All those kinds of things. Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, it was my sister's 5 years older than me. And when I started playing drums the summer of 1972, Exile had just come out. I was 11 years old. And she was playing that record like nonstop, and other Stones records too. But that particular record, she had just come out. So she saw them that summer at the Boston Garden. And it's just by almost like osmosis, I was hearing it, and I was like, what's that song? What's that song? And I went up and bought the 45 for Happy and Tumbling Dice, and so I could play it on my own record player. And but the same thing. And I just remember, it's just like, it was almost like what he was doing, just even with having no experience really playing the drums yet, I recognized it to be different from other stuff I'd heard, other drummers that I'd heard. Just
they got it right, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, when they're playing gospel music on that record, and they're playing like sleazy country music that somehow is morphing with their like junkie rock and Chuck Berryisms, and it all came together in like these Delta blues, and like I say, like the Rolling Stones, and right now the Rolling Stones are the last band. They're the only band that really connects the dots, has a really hot blue bolt of electricity that goes right back to Marvin Gaye and James Brown and Howlin' Wolf and Bo Diddley. They literally learned at these guys' feet. They played with Little Richard, and they watched him, and they learned from the source. And they're not like some kid who learned to play the blues from listening to Eric Clapton, God forbid. But I hear these tragedies do happen. I mean, these guys, these guys were at the source. They literally learned at Howlin' Wolf's feet.
Yeah.
They were, I mean, they literally were on the road with Marvin Gaye and Bo Diddley and all these cats. They know this stuff. They're the last ones that really hold on to that. So it's really amazing. So what you're hearing is authentic. There's
Yeah.
a reason why
Yeah.
other British blues bands, had to overcompensate with like, endless jams or power trio shenanigans and, without, naming names. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Eric Clapton. And Ginger Baker and those guys. It was not the same thing. Obviously, where the Stones
Yeah.
were very confident in laying back on it, and not having
Yep.
to push it through the ceiling every night. They could have enough confidence in the authenticity of what they were doing, without having to over muscle it for, a bunch of, teenage stoners. It's very cool.
Yeah. No, well said. Well, we have to do another one of these because we've just scraped the surface here. Really,
So much fun. I love getting all drum nerdy with you, John.
Me too. Yeah. I do this stuff all day long. So my wife gets tired of it. So I have to come down to my drum room and either talk to myself or my friends. So
I'm here. Call anytime.
all right, cool.
And,
This has
remind
been
everybody,
great.
please find me on my website at mikeedison.com. I love get the word out, spread the gospel. Get 2 copies, buy one for mom and sis and brother. It's not just for drummers, and I'm glad to deface them. And I have cool Sympathy for the Drummer stickers too. So if you order a book from me, you get a sticker too.
That's pretty sweet. And again, I'll repeat, if you buy 2 copies, you can read it 2 times. So
That's
see if I can
fantastic.
get another line. Are there any other questions before we, and hang on, Mike, I'm going to end the stream and then we'll say goodbye
Yeah, right on.
in the room there. This has been great. Okay. Well, I'm glad everybody enjoyed it.
Man.
Between the 2 of us right here, we could go on easily 5, 6, 7 hours. So
Yeah.
we're probably going to spare everybody.
All right. Well, we should get nerdy about other. Blues drums and disco, and there's a lot to talk about. That all sort of like coming out, and that's the genius of the Stones. Like I said, they really do connect to all those things, but like with 0 degree of separation.
Yeah.
For real. When they hit with "Miss You," it's because they were already playing great black music. When they were playing punk rock, it's because they kind of freaking invented it. I
Right.
paused the book that "Satisfaction" was the first punk rock song, and that's something we can all argue about. But there's like a footnote about this big where I defend my case. You know what, John? It's not about getting satisfaction. It's about not getting satisfaction, and that's what brings them back. And that's what they got.
Right on. Right on. All right.
Well, man, thank you. It's been extremely pleasurable talking to you.
Likewise, too, buddy. We'll stay in touch and we'll do this again for sure.
All right.
For sure. Hang on 1 second though. Don't go away.
See everybody.
Thank
you, Charlie.
Where's my little end stream button? Hang on a second. Okay. Yeah. Hang on 1 second. And I'll see you in 1 second, Mike. Don't go away.